if we could have our presentation put together and ready for our presenter, who is an amazing presenter. I've actually had an opportunity to be in a room with him where he has facilitated conversations. I've heard him do public speaking. He is well versed, has so many degrees. It's hard to keep up with how many degrees this man has, but we have an amazing conversation. Maybe you are flush with capital. He's going to be talking about the forms of capital. His name is Dr. Chris Jones, and he's going to come to the stage with us right now. He's the executive director for the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. So without further ado, can you give a hand clap for our Rock Talk presenter this morning?
Good morning. So it's great to be here, and I know the first question that you were wondering is what's going on with my arm. I'm the executive director of the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub, and we are working on a bionic arm. I'm totally joking. I'm totally joking. We want to, but no, I flipped a four-wheeler over and broke my elbow, so that is actually the real story. I was born and raised in Pine Bluff, so anytime I get the opportunity to do something and participate in movements that are transforming Arkansas, it does my heart proud, and I get excited. I'm excited for a couple of reasons. One, that I can maybe share some of my experiences with you all, but more importantly, that I'll get the chance to learn from you and what you're doing. And I love that the focus of what we're talking about is on capital. Capital is important. Capital is currency. Capital is what makes things tick. And I love that we are rethinking and reframing what capital actually is. So I'm only going to give an overview, and then you'll have some other talks throughout the day that'll dive deeper into the 6 forms of capital. As was mentioned earlier, I'm currently the executive director of the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. We are a nonprofit. I am not going to talk much about the Innovation Hub. I had the privilege and honor of cutting my teeth, if you would, at a different nonprofit. It's a community-based organization in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit during this session. But maybe you are flush with capital. The reason I titled this Rock Talk, maybe you are flush with capital, is because a lot of times we think that we don't have what is necessary to make change. We think we don't have it. And I would argue that we have all the tools that are necessary to begin to make change at our disposal, and they are in the form of these 6 forms of capital. So our agenda for today is I'm gonna talk about a little bit about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, DSNI. Raise your hand if you've heard of DSNI. We got 1, maybe 2. All right, well this will be your introduction to an organization that actually has been enormously transformative in not only in Boston, but across the country in terms of shaping what other community-based organizations are doing. We'll talk briefly about asset-based thinking, and then we'll sort of explore the 6 forms of capital and talk about where we start. So by the end of this session, you'll have a greater understanding of and appreciation for the 6 capitals. That's the goal. That's our objective. That's where we're headed. But let's start in a state far, far, far away called Massachusetts. And the reason I say far, far, far away because the last couple of weeks it's been about 110 degrees here, right? I spent 15 years of my life in Boston. It's a phenomenal place, and at the same time, winters last 9 months long. and so shoveling snow got old quick. But in Massachusetts, the capital is Boston, and the center. Boston is divided up into neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods each have their own distinct character, their own distinct qualities, their own distinct personality. And at the center of Boston, which is the heart of Massachusetts, is a neighborhood called Roxbury. You can't see it that well. Lots of things have happened in Roxbury. Some good, some great, some not so good. But it is truly the center of the city. Well, if we go back to the mid 80s, so about 1983 to 1986, in the neighborhood of Roxbury, there was a sub-neighborhood called Dudley, kind of the Dudley area. And in the Dudley area in the mid 1980s, that was the picture that you saw of the neighborhood. And for those who can't see it, it's a lot that has trash that's about 5 or 6 feet tall. And literally, when kids would walk to school, they would get sick because of the toxins that were in the area. Now let me explain a little bit more. I mentioned that Roxbury is the heart of the city. Well, what some folks decided to do was put trash transfer stations in the heart of the city, so that other places could bring their trash to the trash transfer stations, with the idea that once the trash is there, it would get transferred further out into Massachusetts. Make sense? Right? It's kind of logical. Bring the trash to one central location, take big bulks of trash out. Well, that second step didn't happen. And so people were not only legally dumping in the area, but they were also illegally dumping in the area. And that's why you had urban blight. And of course, those of you all who know about redlining, there was disinvestment. Businesses were leaving, lots of vacant property, absentee landowners, absentee homeowners. And this was the situation that actually birthed the organization, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, because some neighbors got together and said, this is enough. In 1986, they said, this is enough. They were tired of their kids being sick walking to school. They were tired of absentee landlords literally burning their houses for insurance money. And they wanted to find a way to make change. So the reason I frame this as a start was because the question is, what did they do to make change? What did they do? Well, first of all, they came together, but in coming together, one of the values that was core to them coming together was this notion of asset-based thinking. Asset-based thinking. So assets are what we want to keep, build upon, and sustain for future generations. Assets can be physical things like a building, a swimming pool, 150-year-old tree, but they can also be intangible things. So with a deficit-based framing, which is what most grantees and organizations start with, we don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have this, or we're bad at that, you would not see the value in the neighborhood. But with an asset-based framing, what they saw was that the fact that half of the neighborhood was vacant land was actually an asset. Because if they can get control of the vacant land, then they could begin to plan for a different future on that asset. And that's what they did. They started a campaign called Take a Stand, Own the Land. Take a stand, own the land. And they went around and they actively advocated for bringing all the vacant lots into a community land trust. Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative was one of the first community land trusts in the country. Now that advocacy and that coming together around a real asset that others saw as a deficit also led to them being the only nonprofit in the country to be given the power of eminent domain. So eminent domain is the right to take private property for public good. And usually it has not been used for the purposes of a community organization. And they said, well, if these landowners don't want to sell us the property, and if they don't want to develop the property for good, then they have no right to own it. We need to take it and do something. Now, fortunately, they only had to use that power of eminent domain maybe once or twice early on, because they went to court. They made an offer for a piece of land. They went to court because the landowner didn't accept the offer. And the judge said, okay, well, you have to sell it to him for $1. Right. that completely changed everyone's mindset. Later on, I'm going to fast forward to talk about what came out of this organizing, what came out of this asset-based thinking. But before I do that, I want to move to exploring this notion of capitals. 6 capitals. So a capital is any type of resource capable of producing additional resources. This is a framing that came from Flora, and Faye. These were researchers that did a study on community capitals in West Kentucky. And I actually used part of this in my master's thesis, my PhD thesis, because what I wanted to understand was how do rural communities use capital to transform their area for good. It was funded by a foundation, and the foundation was ultimately trying to say, where should we invest our money and our resources? Well, what they found was that there were a number of capitals that if you understood the assets from the framing of capitals, then you can understand how much do you have in each account, if you would. So each capital is like an account. And what Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative realized was there was one form of capital that they actually had a lot in that account. And that was natural capital that we'll get to in a second. Capital is also when resources and assets are invested to create new resources. When resources or assets are invested to create new resources, they become capital. So what does that mean? I go back to the example of Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. They saw an asset in the vacant land. They used that asset to create a new resource. What was the new resource? Well, once they brought all the land into a community land trust, they then developed a plan to do economic development on that property, on that new land. So you fast forward to 2013 when I took over. And let me pause for a second and just tell you about my relationship with the organization. My wife and I moved into Roxbury from the Cambridge area, those who know Boston. We moved into Roxbury, and we were literally 300 feet from Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. And they were about to build a school. We weren't pregnant yet, but we were thinking about having a kid, so we said, hey, if they're about to build a school around the corner, we need to be involved in the conversation. Because they were having community conversations around what should a neighborhood school look like and be like. So I got involved in those conversations. That led to being involved on the board of directors for the organization, which then led to me becoming the executive director of the organization for 3 years. So that's my personal connection with Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. Well, if I step back and say, well, what happened on the land? Clearly you now know that one idea they had was to build a school, and they did. But the first idea they had was to put permanently affordable housing on the land trust. So if the community owned the land, they could lease the building to the homeowners at a much lower price and maintain the equity and the asset in the neighborhood. So they turned that asset and created a new resource that then became capital that they could use for further bringing additional assets into the neighborhood, like businesses, like other organizations. So community capitals represent assets in all aspects of community life. That's what Flora, and Faye found. That if you look at what is happening in West Kentucky, they found that some communities were using a range of community assets to redevelop their area. Well, what are the capitals that mattered and that matter? First of all, there's social capital. And again, you all will dig deeper into this throughout the day, so I'm only going to hit it at the surface, but I'll give you a couple of examples of the 6 capitals, and these are examples from Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. Social capital is influence, connections, and storytelling. I love how Flora, and Faye frame it as influence, connections, and storytelling, because often we don't think that there's value in storytelling. But there's tremendous value in storytelling because it's stories. If you look back at our historical DNA, before we could write, we told stories. And it was stories that brought us together. If you think about your own family, it's stories that have transcended decades and generations that you now tell yourself. Those stories are social capital. Well, let me tell you one of the early stories that in which DS&I used their social capital for their benefit. So when the organization was formed, because the neighbors, all the residents came together, they actually had somewhat of a base, and they could exert some influence on the politicians in the area. Well, Mayor Flynn at the time was running this was his first term, and he said, look, I want to do something about the neighborhood. I'm concerned, I care about it. And while he was engaged with them, he actually did not address the trash issue. He didn't address it. So when he came up for re-election, there were still refrigerators that were in the neighborhood, literally on the street as you went by. There were cars that were dumped there. There was trash everywhere. Well, what did they do? They turned his promise into something that hit hard. So they took his bumper sticker and put it on all the cars that were in the neighborhood. So now when anyone drove by, they were reminded that he is the reason why these aren't moved. Well, guess what happened? Because of that, the use of that social capital, the next week, he had all those cars removed. Now, you could have said, we don't have anyone in position of power. Our neighborhood is trash. Our area is trash. There's nothing we can do. Instead, they said, what are our assets? Well, we have an asset in our social capital. We can tell stories. We can tell the story of how he promised to do X, but did not do X. And we can make that story stick by putting a bumper sticker on the car that he promised to move. So as you think about transforming your own areas, think about the stories that can be told. The other is material capital. Material capital are products, services, and distribution. It's kind of things. Then there's intellectual capital. Intellectual capital are ideas, concepts, and knowledge. What do you know? What are the things that you know, and what are the unique ideas that you have? So I go back to Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. What they not only brought together residents, but they brought together urban planners, and they brought together funders, and they brought together other politicians. And they used those urban planners to help, through the neighborhood, develop new ideas. That was their intellectual capital. It's also natural capital, which is sustainability, collaboration. It's the natural things that you see, things that aren't made, but that do exist. There's financial capital, which you know about at your financial assets, the currency you have, but it's also the opportunities. The Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative saw the vacant property as an opportunity, as financial capital. And there's human capital, which is productivity. It's the residents of the neighborhood. It's volunteers that you have for your organization. That's human capital that's important. So let me fast forward now to where the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative is. Now there are almost 300 units of affordable housing on the land. The Community Land Trust owns all of the vacant property. There's a greenhouse, and here's a picture of the greenhouse. And that greenhouse was built in partnership with a national organization called the Food Project. There's a neighborhood school. There are smaller community gardens all throughout. And there are a number of businesses that have now come in. And in fact, one of the most recent developments is there was an old theater that was very historic in Boston. And they helped to revitalize that theater. It was in the neighborhood. So they transformed, by utilizing their capitals, they transformed their neighborhood into something that everyone loved. And of course, as you might suspect, one of the values that they held was development without displacement. And I say that because you might suspect that as you develop an area, gentrification happens, folks who are from outside the area want to come in, which is fine so long as they don't push everyone else out. So their value of development without displacement was a way of saying, we not only want to build assets in this area, but we want to keep those assets for the people who are currently in this area doing all the work to transform the area. So what does it all mean? Where do you start? Where do we start? I think we start with the sort of core principle that they applied, and that is asset-based thinking. You start with the thinking that where someone sees vacant property that is horrible and will never be developed, you can see an opportunity to create a school, to create permanent housing for people who couldn't afford housing before, to create a greenhouse, to create a business, or whatever it is that is appropriate and relevant and excites you in your area. So I think, where do we start? We start with the asset-based thinking, because from there, all sorts of ideas and opportunities will grow. Now, as I mentioned, I wanted to give you a very high-level overview, because you're going to go deep throughout the day. And for me, the most exciting part of being up here is what comes next, and that is questions and answers. Thank you. Mr. Derek, I'm not sure how you want to do the questions.
We have to have mics here, so if you would like to step up to a mic, you can ask a question.
And while you're stepping up, I'm going to put my contact information up here. For those who can't see on the other side, that's me in front of a grasshopper. And the reason I'm in front of a grasshopper is because growing up, I fought grasshoppers and ate honeysuckle. So I really like that picture, because it's representative of kind of who I was and who I am. And if you don't know about fighting grasshoppers, then we can talk.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
So can you go into a little bit of details about how you went about the storytelling, or how the organization went about?
About how they, well, so I think that's a great question, because it's easy to sort of gloss over what storytelling means. Part of, so I would say kind of step one was to bring the voices together to the table. And a major part of bringing the voices together to the table is, one, asking, are all the voices around the table in the first place? And are all the voices that are there, do they actually have voice? So what I love about and there are two other things I'll mention in a second, but what I love about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative is that their governance is a board. And that board is made up of 35 members. And those 35 members, within that 35, there are permanent seats. There are designated seats, I should say. And the seats are designated by who's in the neighborhood. So at the time, there was a certain percent of the population that was African American, a certain percent that was Cape Verdean, a certain percent that was Hispanic. There were businesses in the neighborhood, there were politicians in the neighborhood, and there were youth in the neighborhood. And they allocated a board seat for each of those groups. What that does is it amplifies voices that may not have been amplified. So that's kind of step one. Make sure that the appropriate voices are amplified. And step two is they actually collected the voices. So from the very beginning, they collected the stories. They collected the narratives. I actually believe that the reason they were so successful and so intentional about collecting the narratives is because a large portion of the neighborhood were immigrants from Cabo Verde, which is the Cape Verdean Islands off the coast of East Africa, West Africa. And because of that connection, their culture was about telling stories a lot more than cultures we have here now. So they brought that to bear. Well, the other two things they did was they made a documentary about the neighborhood. So if you look up, the documentary the first one is called Holding Ground. Holding Ground. And the second one is called Gaining Ground. So I told you their first campaign was Take a Stand on the Land. That was about like holding steady. And then from there you gain. But there's also a book about the neighborhood and the book is called Streets of Hope. So they amplified the voices, they put everybody together at the table, they captured the stories, and then they told it in the media that was most relevant, which is documentaries and books. Thanks for that question.
So, Dr. Jones, we do have a question coming up, but what we're going to do is we're going to kind of transition this space to where we can sit at the seats.
Sure.
And then we have some tabletop discussions that are going to happen with the participants. So can we give Dr. Jones a hand, please? Just
thank you.
As we transition, we are really excited to have with us the executive director of Our House, hailing from Conway, Arkansas, but been in Little Rock for a long time. We have with us today Ben Goodwin, who's going to talk with us about getting the stars aligned for successful nonprofit fundraising. So kind of extending from Dr. Jones, talking about our capital, and he reframed how we can think about capital as assets and resources that build other assets and resources. It becomes capital. Ben Goodwin's going to take us through another framework of how to be successful as a nonprofit. So if we can give Ben a round of applause. Thank you, Ben.
Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to be here with you today. I know that one of the goals of this conference is to really get broad about capital beyond just dollars and cents. But for 45 minutes, I want to hone back in on dollars and cents, financial capital, and how to raise money for your nonprofit. So let me just get a sense of, in the room here, raise your hand if you're an employee of a nonprofit. Okay. Raise your hand if part of your job at your nonprofit is raising money. Okay, great. So I came to the right place. I've got 45 minutes. I'm not going to be able to give you a technical understanding of any specific thing about fundraising. I want it to be specific, but it's also going to be, well, let's just see what I got on here. So I'm going to break down 4 components of successful fundraising as I see them. I'm going to talk about the mindset that you take when you approach fundraising, and I'm going to talk about a dichotomy that I see often and try to cultivate between are you attracting investment or are you attracting donations? So let's get started. Oh yeah, and then the objectives, how do you align these components that I'm going to outline? And then how do you cultivate an approach to fundraising in which you're attracting investment rather than donations? Why am I here? I think I have been a fundraiser for 15 years here in Little Rock. I started at UAMS, and then I worked for a group called Southern Bank Corp for a few years, and they do rural development, and I was able to write grants for them, not just for their nonprofit, but for a wide range of community initiatives in the Delta region of our state and Mississippi. And so it gave me a lot of different experiences raising money for different types of causes. And then about 10 years ago, I joined Our House, and I was a part-time grants manager for Our House, the first of it that Our House had ever had. And and it was a small nonprofit then, and I'm going to show you that it's no longer a small nonprofit. So I started right around there, not to brag or anything, but this is what I know how to do. And speaking of stars aligning, the cause that our house promotes of providing a pathway out of homelessness, particularly for families with children, was what I needed, what I connected with. And so I was able to kind of apply what I'd learned in fundraising to one cause that really lit my fire, that really spoke to my heart, and help an organization grow to achieve its mission in an even better way. And now I feel really blessed and privileged to have a chance to be the executive director of the organization, which I've been for about 2 years. For 20 years of Our House's history, we had about a steady $500,000 a year budget, and now it's well over $4 million. And where does all that money come from? Well, you probably can't read it from your seats, but this bar graph just shows, generally speaking, the diversity of funding sources that we have. 162 corporations, 28 congregations, 1,000 plus individuals, 25 private foundations, earned income, the city of Little Rock, the state of Arkansas, and a diversity of different federal funding sources. So my bias, my preconception about fundraising is how can we grow to do more? So you saw the growth there. And how can we build a broad and diverse base of funding to support that? And I think that a diverse base of funding is one that is more sustainable. You know, one of these funding sources goes away and we don't have to talk about closing our doors tomorrow. And it's also, I just think, more conducive to an organization that is adaptable, flexible, innovative, that it causes you to strengthen and flex different muscles. And so when I talk today, I'm not going to drill in on any one of these types of fundraising. I'm going to try to describe the common threads throughout. And so this quote from Walt Whitman stood out to me for two reasons. One is that this is the start of his poem, Leaves of Grass, which is a book-length poem. And but he's saying, this isn't just a poem, this is every poem. So I like that because that's kind of what I'm trying to do. What is the common thread to every fundraising appeal? And also I like it because it's just really confident, right? And I think confidence is important in fundraising. So he's a very confident poet. So what are the stars that I want to help you think about aligning? And they are, without more fanfare, the product, the person, the context, and the proposal. And so after this, if anybody has a synonym for context that starts with P, then next time this will be called the 4 Ps of fundraising, but context is the best word I've come up with so far. So what do these words mean? I'm going to get into it. So the product is your organization's story and strategy. It's what you're selling, basically. It's what is it that you do? How do you do it? How well do you do it? How do you prove that you do it well? What are the data? What are the stories you tell? What is your strategy? Where are you going? What's your plan for the next year or the next 5 years? It's everything about your organization that you have control over. If depending on your position in the organization, you may have more or less control, but it's important to know what your product is and to think about your product and think about, in a sort of a sales mindset, how can I make my product better so more people are going to want to support it? So making your product better, making your organization better is a good thing to do, right? And it also happens to make your organization easier for funders to fund. And so even though it's outside of the scope of fundraising, I'm sure you've had lots of other sessions where you've talked about how to build a stronger organization. It's all important. None of it's irrelevant to your fundraising success. It's the most relevant thing. What do you do? All right, so next up we have the person. So who's this person? It is the funder or the potential funder. And I use the person even to describe an organization like a state agency or a foundation or a company, because, of course, those are just groups of people, right? And somebody in that company is the one that makes the decision. And so the thing with the person, the funder, is you don't have any control over them, right? Like they just are who they are. That company is what it is. That government agency does what it does. But you do have control over how much you know about them and understand them. And it's critically important. I think in all fundraising is kind of like persuasive writing or persuasive talking. And the first rule of persuasion is know your audience, right? And so if you don't know anything about your audience, your funding proposals are going to fall flat. And That includes, individual, agency. It also includes the broad public. It includes whoever sees your pitch on your Facebook page. If you don't know anything about them, you're going to be less successful than if you knew something about who was actually looking at your Facebook page. And what do you want to know about them? Well, what do they care about? What motivates them? What have they funded before? What's their history with philanthropy and engagement in the community? This is information that is out there. You can, if it's a foundation, you can go on GuideStar and figure out what they funded in the past, and that's important to know. Not just what they say they like to fund, but what do they actually fund? Where do they actually put their money? When I go into buildings and see, the donor wall, I take a look at that, and it's like, oh, I know this person. Now I realize that they support the arts because they're a donor to the renovated Robinson Center. And use that information to develop a picture of who the people are that you're asking for money. Next up, we got the context.
The
So
perspective. We got a P for you, Ben. Perspective.
could be perspective. Let's workshop that after we hear what it is. It might be perfect. I'm working on it, but I got to get on with this. So the context is, let me see if I can do backup. Okay, so the context is whatever you know about the person, it's sort of like the flip side of that. It's what they know about you, and this is something that is critically important. Maybe one of the most important things. Maybe second to the product is the context. And what do they think about you? Maybe they think they know something about you, but they don't really know it because they're wrong, but they think it. It's your reputation. It's what they, just their preconceptions about you. And those can range from positive. They think you're, the best thing since sliced bread. They funded you before. All their friends fund you. They're all in on your cause. It could be in the middle. They know not a thing about you. It could be negative. They've heard bad things. They heard that so-and-so made a donation and didn't get a thank you letter. It could be that, they read an article in the paper about your organization that didn't sound too positive. And so, not all of that is in your control, but it is within your control to take ownership of that and to proactively try to create a positive context with that funder and with the community so that your proposals are met on more positive terrain when they come in. And we're going to talk more about this in a minute, but yeah, it's just important to know that, even if you got a perfect product and you know everything about this person, you got the greatest pitch in the world, how they're primed to receive it is important, what they already think about you. And then the last P is proposal. And this is, important, but it's probably the least important, honestly. And this is what most fundraising seminars talk about. This is, and there's a lot of ways to do this right or wrong, and so I'm not saying it's unimportant. It's really important. But if without the other 3 stars in place, the proposal just ultimately doesn't matter. It's not going to be successful. And so it's the ask. Is it a 150-page grant application to a federal agency? Is it a 1-page proposal to a foundation? Is it I'm sitting across the table from you, making a direct ask person to person? Is it a letter you're sending to 1,000 people in the community? Is it an appeal on your Facebook page? All those I'm just calling the proposal. And you've got a lot of choices to make in how you make that proposal. And I described I think y'all had another session maybe where you talked about how to make an elevator pitch or how to tell your story versus getting more detailed, really laying it out for somebody. how you make the pitch depends on what you know about that person in the context you've created with them. And so if you know that they're the type who wants the 15-page treatise about, you know, what you're all about, then that's what you give them, because you've learned that in your communications with them. If you know that they're the type who, you know, leads with their heart when they make giving decisions, then you want to come with a really, you know, powerful, emotional story about the impact of your work. And so you got to customize it to the person or to your conception of the audience that is going to be listening to your proposal. And then lastly, whole versus part just means you can, you know, ideally, as much as possible, you want to be selling the whole story of your organization, the big story, the big vision of this is what we're all about, this is how we're going to change the world. But there's also ways to pitch pieces of what you do. Like, for instance, at our house, you know, I could make a pitch to say, you know, join us, invest in us to help us build a pathway out of homelessness for hundreds of families in our community next year. Or I could say, join our house and support our early childhood center, which helps 70 homeless children each day. So that's a part of us that is just a different program. But you could also, there's parts that might be like, you know, join us in investing in this piece of our capacity building, in this one-time expense that's going to help us get to the next level of efficiency. So, you know, thinking about specifically what you want to ask for is important, but it needs to be informed by all the other stars that we've talked about. All right, so those are the 4 stars, and how I think they are all just critically important and have to be aligned to be successful. I want to stop in a minute and ask y'all to participate, but there's lots of ways that the stars can be out of alignment. But one thing I just want to share is that your product, I think it's important, and this, we'll get into this more, but it's important to, when you think about how could I change my organization to make it more appealing to funders, that kind of is, you're walking on dangerous ground in a certain sense, because you don't want to stretch yourself to just meet a funder's expectations and get away from your core mission. And so I understand that well, and I'm sure you do too. And so this isn't going to be about that. What I'm saying is every organization is not, no organization is perfect. Let me put it that way. Our house is far from perfect. But your imperfections and can be opportunities to grow and to get better. And so make those part of your story, I guess would be what I'd say. Make those part of your product. A strategic plan can be a helpful way to do that. A strategic plan says, hey, we're here today, and in 5 years we want to be here. And here's the pieces of the puzzle that we need to add, that we need to improve on, that we need to get better at. And that's what a strategic plan is. And then that becomes a product that you can make a proposal to the right funder to fund. An example I would give is, you know, our house has always been, at least in my time, has always been very serious about tracking our outcomes. You know, like not just the outputs, not just how many people we're serving, but the outcomes. How are we changing their lives? You know, are they getting jobs? How much are they making at those jobs? Are they getting homes of their own when they move out? Are they building savings? How much are they saving? How are our kids doing in school? What are their report card grades? How are our early kids preparing for kindergarten? How can we measure that? So we've tracked that stuff for a while, but we realized, hey, as we've grown, this is hard to keep up with, and we need a database. We need it, and this was in our strategic plan. We need a database that is customized to our work, that isn't some off-the-shelf thing. We're a one-of-a-kind organization. We need something that fits us. And so, you know, that is one way to look at it as a weakness. We don't have a database, but it's an opportunity for a funder to connect with us and help us reach a higher level of outcomes and impact. And so we did that, and we found a funder that's just their cup of tea, is helping nonprofits build capacity in that way. and we were able to make a pitch. We were able to show how it fit in with our whole story, the product. We got to know them. We invited them out to our house. We had phone calls. We set the context so they knew what was coming. And then when we submitted their proposal, again, it was like an email. It was like, okay, we're ready to do our database. You know, they didn't care, and every funder's different, but they didn't care about their proposal. They just knew what they were signing on to. So, you know, whatever you don't do now that you want to be doing or that you could be doing to do your job better, to have a bigger impact, can be part of your story, and that can be a very positive way to go about getting better and growing. Okay, so what I wanted to ask, and I'd love somebody to chime in, but if you have an example, what are some things you could do to learn more about let's talk about current donors, about your current donors. Anybody have an idea? Maybe something they just thought of that they haven't done before? Steve?
Oh, hi.
I won't know everyone's name, but I know his.
God, again, these voices. So, Ben, first of all, thanks for being here. We truly appreciate your expertise and your passion for nonprofits here. One of the things, hey, I'm Steve Bernacchi with City Connections. Thank you, Dana. I'm not Dana, I'm Steve. One of the things we've done a poor job of, quite frankly, over the past couple of years is keeping in touch with our donors and maintaining those relationships. But I know that we are attempting to start having donor appreciation luncheons and donor appreciation events, as well as volunteer appreciation, because a lot of times your volunteers, I think it's a 2-to-1 factor, volunteers becoming donors to your mission. I guess to throw that question back at you, those are some of the things I think we as maybe smaller nonprofits do. What does our house do to recognize their donors?
Great. So thank you, Steve. One thing I'll say that what you said taps into something I think is really important. And let me back up to the context. Oh, wait. I got to hold it. I can't do that. I will come back to that. But the context. The most important donors to your organization are the current donors. And that's always been my instinct. And recently I've had my, preconception affirmed by some other professionals that I've read. But they, they say you should spend 2 to 3 times as much time engaging your current donors than going out and finding new donors. And even if your goal is to grow and make more money and get bigger, your current donors are going to be the driving force of that. And so, yeah, donor appreciation is a great way to set a better context for your current donors. And, I think our house, we ultimately, and we'll get more into this, ultimately to me the mindset that we have with donor appreciation is showing them the return on their investment. And so, and we'll talk more about that, but communicating that on our, all our communications with them is the impact of what you're doing. And so, things like letters, and we do a lot of, just some nuts and bolts. We do every board meeting, we hand each board member a little card with a name of a donor, volunteer, meal server, some supporter, and just ask them to make a call. We do an annual thanks-a-thon where we call all our donors. We used to call all our donors. Now it's all of them over a certain relatively small amount. And our board gets involved in that. And so, things like that. We have signage in our buildings, but some of the things other folks do, we don't do. We don't, for our big fundraising events, we put sponsorships on that and get that out there, and we do Facebook posts highlighting our donors. So I don't know if that helps, but donor appreciation is a big thing in cultivating the good, positive context with your current donors. Another big thing with your current donors is, and this gets back to return on investment, is just doing what you say you're going to do, getting your grant reports in on time, getting them in ahead of time. Finding ways, this is a big one for me, in general, finding ways to interact with your donors outside of the ask, outside of the context. So thanking them is one way to do it, recognizing them, but also just, is there other business you can do with your donors? Ask for their expertise, run an idea past them, go to a conference with them, invite them out to see an event that you're having at your program that connects with what they've supported in your work. Find ways to interact and build a relationship that isn't always, so that every time they see your number on their phone, they know they're not going to get an ask. Maybe it's going to be some exciting thing that you're going to tell them, you're going to invite them to, you're going to ask them advice. Another little watchword that I've always followed, and this is particularly for like individual donors, is if you want money, ask for opinions. If you want opinions, ask for money. So I'll let y'all chew on that for a minute. Yes, ma'am. Do you have an idea?
Good morning. No, I don't have an idea, but I'm sure you will for me. I'm Deborah Bell with Better Community Development.
Deborah.
Hey, man. I want to ask you, how do you get your board motivated?
Well, Reverend Robinson came to my talk about that, I believe. So get the full notes from him, but I've got a whole hour on that. How do you get him motivated? Well, can I put a pin in that and come back to it? Ultimately, I think it comes down to picking the right board members in the first place. Okay, great, yeah, somebody like that. So let me just drill. I'll go ahead and talk about that now. There's a lot of other things you can do. Go ahead. You have a follow-up?
I'm back. So, right, I understand that. But in some proposals, some grants, they encourage, insist, it is mandatory that you have people from the community that you're providing services with. With and for.
With and for?
Yes. But just go ahead and give me a nugget. I just want to hear you talk.
Okay. Okay. Well, I didn't quite connect with that second question. So if you want to follow up later, I'd be happy to. But on the first question about the board, I do think picking the right board members is the first and most important thing. And so, like at our house, in our strategic plan, we have been really thoughtful about who we want on our board. What are the criteria? And one of them, right at the top of the list, is that we want people who are already engaged in what our house does. And so there's nobody on our board that's just a place, like a big name, that literally that's a requirement. You have to have already been involved in some way. You've had to already shown that you care about this work. And so that in itself screens for a lot of engagement right on the front. The other piece we have is term limits. So I think I've been in both situations. I think term limits are strong. There's upsides and downsides to both, but I would pick term limits because, that I think most boards that aren't engaged that I've seen have been the place that have the board members who've been there for 25 years, and they remember the good old days of the last executive director who did things so much better than you, and all the hard work they put in to get it going, and so that's maybe a little bit of prejudice there, but I think that I've seen that a lot, and so boards that aren't engaged often have longer average tenure. Our house has a 6-year term limit, so you can only be on the board for 6 years. And I've had to just be it's been so painful to say goodbye to some of my good board members. But it's also been such a graceful way to let some of the ones who haven't been engaged go without having to have any kind of conflict about it. So those are the two things I would, but if you want to talk more about that, Deborah, I'd love to.
Okay,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
I think I have a question that builds off of her
Okay.
snippet that she had, and you're
Sure.
looking at your watch. Are you out
Yeah.
of time?
I've got 14 minutes, and I've
Okay,
got...
good. So I'll take that.
Okay.
Okay, so I think in talking about boards and talking about capital campaigns and fundraising and indigenous leaders that are from the background that you come from, I just feel like, I was just talking with my table a little bit, like I feel like there are kind of two pockets. Like I want board members that know the community that they come from. They represent the people groups that we serve. They can speak to that. They like know the business of homelessness. They know the business of communities in crisis. They know what they're talking about because they've lived it and been there and done that, and they represent that population. Those people, I do not feel like, are the same group of board members that have the social impact and the influence, and they can go talk to the mayor, and they have the confidence to go and like be game changers, and they're amazing fundraisers, and they have a business plan background, and like they're not the same people. And so I feel like I am like maybe trying to come up with like an advisory committee that advises how we run the place. And then I have like this board team that are the social influencers. And like, how do you get those two worlds to collide and create this amazing board that can go get your money and also know your people? The end.
I think it's a great question, and it sounds like it connects to another session that I wasn't at. And I understand the question. I've had conversations about that. I don't feel like I want to just wing it and give an answer to that. I think to just describe our house, we have, as I've come up in the nonprofit industry, what I've been taught, and times are changing, things are changing, perspectives are broadening. The number one role of the board is to raise money. And so that is reflected, I think, in the Our House board. That's the biggest expectation I have of them is to help me raise money. And so, in terms of that balance, we're probably tilted this way. We're trying to balance it, in some ways a little bit, but I still think that, it depends on how it fits in with your strategy. Like if you want to grow, and you want to go out and raise a lot of money because you need to meet your strategy, you need a board that's bought into that. And even the people who represent underserved communities who are closer to the impact point of your work, if they need to connect with that vision too, they're on the board. And so in general, I would say probably my bias would not be towards putting them on an advisory council, put them in the real seat of power, but they need to connect with that strategy. And then, they presumably, if they buy into it, they'll understand power differentials in our society and how you need people who have been, the beneficiaries of great privilege to support causes that benefit people who aren't, especially in the capitalist world we live in. Anyway, this is getting a little bit like college, so I'm going to move on. But if you want to talk about it more, I'd be happy to. But in general, I would advise you not to try to put them on a different board, but bring them together. Or united around one vision and one strategy. And that's going to be the most challenging outcome. But in so many cases, the most challenging thing is the thing that, needs to be done. So, yes, ma'am. It's not on? I could hear you.
Well, that was my professor voice, so this is going to help my vocal cords. I ran into that about 15 years ago at Levi Hospital. We had a board that did not have influence or affluence, and so we started out by having a foundation board to recruit those kind of people with influence and affluence, and then if they did their jobs, then they got to be potentially promoted to the full board. It worked well for us because it brought in more people that we needed, and over time, it has become one of the strongest boards in Hot Springs because those kind of people are on the board, and plus they're really into the mission as well. We had former patients that were on the board, physicians in the community, and that kind of thing. So
That's great.
they would meet together and
connect. That could be a good strategy.
yeah, and I'm here to learn, but the teacher in me, when I heard that, I'm like, gosh, I went through that same thing, and I can't stand to sit on information and not share it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on. Here's a few other exercises you could do. What are some things you could do to build a better context? We talked about that a little. What are some parts of the whole that you could make proposals around of your product? All right, I want to move on. Who's heard of this term, the scarcity mindset? Anybody want to volunteer giving us a definition of it? Yes, sir.
A simple example is just seeing the glass is half empty.
Yeah, is the glass half empty? versus, so this gentleman said, is the glass half empty? I think that represents the scarcity mindset. Usually it's contrasted with the abundance mindset. I don't think abundance is quite the word I go for in this context, but the scarcity mindset, so what am I talking about now? I'm talking about one way to approach, one way to think about aligning those stars, one way to think about all your fundraising, to find the right spot for your organization. Every organization is different, but to find the right spot for your organization on this spectrum and to shift towards the abundance mindset from the scarcity mindset. So in fundraising, the scarcity mindset is, to me, represented by this phrase, keep the doors open. And I want to show y'all something. I've got it's in my other pocket here. I've got a button. Probably nobody can see it, but can I ask one of y'all to read what this says? Will you read it?
It says, keep the doors open.
What does it say at the bottom?
Our house.
Keep the doors open, our house. So this is something I found in a drawer from the olden days of our house, and I keep it as a reminder of those 20 years that our house was limping along, just to be honest. You know, some years were better than others, but this was what we were putting out there in terms of energy into the world, into our community, even in our own heads, was help us keep the doors open, help us keep from having to shut this place down and force these poor homeless people onto the street. And I'm overselling it, and I'm truly not criticizing. I mean, the founders of our house, I have the greatest respect for, but I feel like the scarcity mindset is one that has some strings attached that it can be hard to see when you're trapped in those, and it can be really hard to break out of. And I just think it's not conducive to growth. It's not conducive to a great relationship with that funder. There are people for whom that is what they want to fund. They want to be the finger in the dam that keeps the bad thing from happening. But I think people are more engaged and more motivated to be a part of making an impact and making a change. I think people are more primed. They're more primed to give more money. So this will orient you towards bigger gifts. If you say, instead of keep the doors open, join us in making an impact. That has been the approach at our house. That is our story. As much as possible, we want to encourage people to be, to be investors, to make investments in our work. We have a plan, we have a strategy, it makes an impact. We know what that impact is. We can measure it. We can tell you that story. We want you to be an investor in helping us do what we've laid out to do and do it better and do it bigger. And then that creates this more positive forward rolling dynamic with the donor where you get to report back on the impact of that investment. You know, they get excited. They see the fruits of what they put their money in. And they want to do it again. Like, what's next? You know, it's kind of a forward-moving thing. Rather than the keep the doors open mindset is like, you know, I know they're going to call next year to make sure that I put my finger back in that hole in the dam. And eventually they'll stop taking that call. You know, like they're less inclined to give more. They're less inclined to stay excited about what you're doing if they think that what they're doing, they're less inclined to get involved in the first place because, you know, you don't want to be the last person to give to an organization right before it goes under, right? And you know, I'm overstating that, but there is some powerful psychology there that I think, you know, it's, again, what excites me is delivering a return, is having an impact. And I think it's probably what excites everybody in this room. So we need to learn to conceive of what we're doing in that mode and tell our story in that way. Well, hold on, let me go back. So one thing I just want to say, as this morning I was thinking right in the middle, I might make this into a thing too, but put transactional mindset right in the middle. And I think can be a very positive way to fundraise. Two examples would be, well, the biggest one to me is like the heifer Heifer, which is an organization I have tremendous amount of respect for. I love it. I used to volunteer there. Buy $50 and your grandma gets a card that says that you've bought her a goat, and it's going to go to a family in need in a developing country, and they're going to use it to make a generational transformation in their family and their community's life. And so, it connects to the abundance mindset, but it's also transactional. $50 gets you this. $1,000 puts a kid through our summer program. And I think that can be a fine way to fundraise, but as much as possible, at our house, we try to stick with the abundance mindset, stick with the investment mindset. We want people to have enough faith in us and be so bought into our vision that they're not so concerned about the details of what are you going to spend the money on. They want to see that impact. And if you can get funders to support you at that level, again, it's probably the most challenging way to do it, but the most challenging is often the best way to do it. And if your organization can get people bought in at that level, then that creates so many more opportunities for you to be innovative. All the things that I heard, Chris and Derek talking about in the last session, how to be innovative, how to think outside the box, how to do different things. If all your funding sources come with strings attached and you can't go to a meeting with someone, that unless you get okay from the funder ahead of time, then you're not going to be able to make those partnerships. So that kind of investment's important. And so I think we don't have much time, but I do want to spend a little time on these three questions. Well, first is just, I think as an exercise, formulate the pure scarcity mindset pitch for your organization just to get it out of your system. And then see if you see things like that in your current communications. And I don't want to, this is again not critical, but once you start seeing it, you'll see it everywhere. It's a huge issue for Arkansas, which I think has an inferiority complex, for our community, for nonprofits in every community, but especially in this community, is the scarcity mindset. And so, just I hope this is taken in a good-natured way, but the title that Dana and the crew gave for my session was How to Survive in Today's Competitive World. And there's the scarcity mindset right there. And so, so anyway, you'll just start seeing it everywhere. So train yourself to start seeing it in your communications. And then think through, what is a return on investment that I could offer a donor or an investor, let's say. And then how could I make that return on investment clearer? Is there other data I could be tracking? Are there other stories I could be telling? Are there other angles? And then, oh yeah, I do have one more. This is the most important. The investor mindset of, I'm still holding that. Attracting investors requires basically the highest level of trust from your donors. So why should they trust you? Think about if someone asked that, just imagine you're sitting across the table from a millionaire who can write you $1 million check, and he's this close to doing it. He's like, I bought into your mission, I see the vision, I see why I should just make this check and not put any strings on it, but why should I trust you to do what you say you're going to do? And what's your answer to that question? I know what it is for our house. Here's some of the things I say at our house. We have a 32-year track record of success. We have, I've been there for 10 years myself. We have a 4-star Charity Navigator rating. We have a 100% score on Charity Navigator. We have this broad and diverse group of community leaders on our 24-member board of directors who are bought into what we do. And on, things like that. We have delivered. 5 years ago, I asked you to step out and build a children's center for us, and you and others in the community helped us raise $5 million. And now, 5 years later, it is full to capacity every single day with kids who are in the highest quality rated center in the state, who are receiving curriculum-based services that have a measurable impact. Thank you for your donation 5 years ago. Are you with us for the next round? And the answer is going to be yes. You've got that track record of success. So building that takes some time. But you know, wherever you are now, what is your answer to that question? How could you make your answer stronger? I think that's kind of the last thing I want to leave you with, assuming I'm out of time. Am I out of time, Darren?
You are out of
Okay,
time.
thanks, Dan. Thank you, everyone.
And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel that's going to be coming up. We have an amazing keynote speaker, Celia Swanson, who's the first female executive vice president of Walmart. Give it up for that, y'all. Give it up for her. She's amazing. And we then we have Deborah Robinson, who's going to be doing the interview for us. So without further ado, all right, we got a cheer section for Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you. How are you all? Is it afternoon yet? Is it still morning? Sometimes you're not quite sure what time of day it is. Welcome. We are so excited to be here, and I'm sure I'm speaking on your behalf as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thrilled.
Absolutely. Really glad to be here. When I was asked by Dana to come and to do this interview, every time I'm asked to do an interview, I always think, is there something that I need in my life personally at the moment? And of course, I'm a serial entrepreneur, a journalist, and I also have my own foundation. So having this opportunity to sit with Celia is really an honor. So I just want you guys to just peep in, because I'm going to make sure that I get everything I need to run my foundation, and I hope it's what you'll need as well. And then we'll open up for questions. And I'm just honored to have you in our presence today.
It is my pleasure. Thank
All
you very
right.
much for inviting me to be here.
Wow, did you guys take a look over there on the side there to see her new book, Gracious and Strong? I went through it last night, and I had to get my copy today, so make sure you get your copy, because I have this thing in my office where I've got so many autographed copies. So this is an opportunity to get this, and you want to get it and get it autographed. I'll get mine autographed after this.
You got it.
Cool.
Happy to do that.
All right. So what I want to do is I simply want to have an opportunity to get to know her first, and then I want you all to, then I want her to really impart within us so that we can go back and make some massive changes and really with our communities and the jobs and things that we are involved in. So I just want to start there. In your book, I noticed that you ask a question in your book to the readers, and you also ask it in many of your speeches. You ask them, where are they on their journey to leadership? I know you have your first, you've got a list of firsts, but where are you now on your journey?
I'm at an awesome moment in my journey because I spent 40 years in retailing. The last 26 years were with Walmart, Sam's Club and Walmart. Great organization. I learned a lot. But I retired from Walmart in February of 2016. I wrote a book. I'm a speaker. I'm a consultant. I'm an executive coach. And I get to take all the skills that I was able to learn along the way, in addition to being a board member and a board chair for several nonprofit organizations in Northwest Arkansas. So this part of my journey is kind of the pinnacle of everything that's been invested in me that I now get to give back.
Yeah. Being one of the first at Walmart to be in that executive position, why you? What was your skill set that allowed them to say she's the one?
That's such a great question, because the odds were not in my favor for this particular choice. I'm a human resource professional by trade and profession. I joined the Sam's Club organization as a part of an acquisition. I was with Pace Membership Warehouse, and out of Denver, Colorado, and we were bought by Sam's Club. Well, not very many people made that transition to Sam's Club and Walmart, but I had a skill set they needed. And that skill set was being great at communicating with our associates, and we had some labor campaign challenges, and I'd run labor campaigns inside the company and won those campaigns in support for the organization. And all of a sudden, Walmart found themselves in a potential where there were some there might be organizing activity. I only use that example because one of the first things that I would share, why me, is I had a skill set they needed. Nobody else had it. But they needed it, and they had the foresight to understand that that was going to be a big part of their associate relations strategy going forward. But when I came into the organization, I was a student of the culture. I spent a lot of time talking to the associates in the grassroots clubs and not sticking in my office and being a figurehead back in the home office, but really getting out and talking to the people. And I had a way of being able to have a conversation, pick out what was most important to the people that I was talking to, and then turn it around into action that mattered for them and for the company. So my sponsor left, the woman who hired me, she left, and the CEO of Sam's Club called me and said, we'd like to offer you this position to be a senior vice president of all things called support, which is finance, logistics, human resources, membership, and marketing. And in the club business, your marketing, your membership revenue is your profit. So having a P&L responsibility was really important. And I said, why me? And they said, because you've come into the organization, you've been here 3 years, and yet you've been able to build relationships, make an impact, partner with people that didn't sometimes want to partner with you, but they knew that the outcome was necessary for you and them to come together. And so I said yes, and I got supported all along the way. I got promoted to first EVP, Executive Vice President. I was on the Executive Leadership Council with Lee Scott, our CEO at that time, and found all kinds of ways to make an impact there. But I was honored to represent the women and quite honestly, help change the representation of women, at least on the Leadership Council going forward.
And so what would you say was one of the biggest takeaways that you brought out of Walmart and out of that 25-plus experience working with them?
One, I have several. My first would be the principle of what's your value proposition. Whether you're a nonprofit, and I work with a lot of nonprofits right now, and I'll talk about that in a minute, or you're an individual. Why do they need you in the mix? Because if they don't need you, then you might not get any of their time and attention. But if you have a value proposition that matters, you're going to get an audience. Then, be succinct, be direct, and explain why you're there and how you can partner. And third would be, don't underestimate the power of your voice and the power of your influence. So many times, and it happens with women more than men, but we take time to figure out, okay, I have to be the smartest one in the room. I have to know all my data and materials better than anybody else. Nobody's going to be able to ask me a question that I can't answer. And then 2 years later, and that's what happened to me, it took me 2 years to feel comfortable in my own skin at the executive table. And I wasted 2 years. That's the point. Finally, when I figured out, okay, they didn't invite me to be at the table because I looked like everybody else. They invited me because I didn't. They invited me because I had a different point of view about the business, and they needed to hear it. Well, if I wasn't going to be confident enough to share it, then they didn't need me at the table. And when I realized that, I started to be able to make a real impact. And I told stories, and stories that resonated with the organization with a clear outcome to achieve. And quite honestly, when I figured out that amount of influence and authority that I had in the organization, tremendous things happened that were completely unexpected. And we'll talk a little bit about those later on, but those would be my tips.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute because I know a lot of us here, we do as well wrestle with, and you talk about in your book, authenticity, whether it's as an individual working in your organization or it is as an organization presenting it to the community and to the world, making sure that you are authentic in what you're representing. Even as, you know, as an exec in Walmart, you still had to deal with that issue of being authentic, being your authentic self.
Absolutely. It was one of the greatest discoveries that I had about myself is when I showed up as my authentic self. Nobody could argue with me about that. They made a choice. Did they like it? Did they not like it? Did I fit within their mold? Was I somebody that they wanted to work with? Those were all the choices. But when I could stand and be authentic in my beliefs, my values, I call them even belief windows in my book, and talk about what are those, you know, stories in your head that you believe about yourself and what you can do, and how can you break out of those stories in your head that are called limiting beliefs. But also just saying, hey, this is my experience. It's not the experience of you who's sitting across the table from me, but I want to hear yours as well. And together we'll come up with an outcome that is going to be magical. Mm-hmm. But if we don't even have those conversations on a real authentic level, then we'll never get to a great solution.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, we think that we are not really who we are and what we believe, especially if we're representing an organization, really doesn't matter. But that authenticity, as you are representing your organization, that does matter, right?
Oh, it matters more than I gave it credit for early in my career. One of the stories I like to tell is during my tenure on the executive committee, we each year would get our benefits program brought to us for review and a vote at the leadership level. And we had evolved, so we now had 4 women sitting on the executive committee out of 26, which is pretty good. And I wasn't the only one there. But we were talking about our benefits package, and there were men all around the room talking about, you know, what they thought of the options and what were they going to vote for when it was time to vote. So it was really clear where everybody else in the room was. And none of the women were talking. We were sitting in our seats just listening. And it was Lee Scott, and he stopped the conversation and he said, okay, I haven't heard from any one of the women. So I'm going to stop, which is great inclusive behavior. Stop. I want to hear from every single one of you before we move on. And because I'd been sitting there the longest, he said, Swanson, you're up first. And in a second, you have to think about, because you already know what's the opinion of those different from me in the room, but my vote's going to be a different vote than theirs. So how do I make a compelling case for my position? And so I began with a personal story. And we were voting on, you know, well baby care and immunizations and preventative care for children. And I said, this is the experience my husband went through when he took our preschool daughter to the doctor to get her shots and get her immunizations and health taken care of before she started school. And honestly, Walmart didn't cover it. And so they suggested that we go somewhere else for it because it wasn't covered in the insurance plan. And my husband was mortified. And he couldn't believe that here's this family-friendly organization, family-first organization, and that wasn't part of our plan. And then I said, I had to talk him off the roof. I had to talk him out of, hey, let's move on. And I said, we can make a change here. We can make a difference here. But none of those men had had that experience. They hadn't taken their kids to get, you know, their health records updated for school. The next woman comes on and she says, I'm going to tell you my personal experience here, and it's almost identical to what Celia's was. Third woman speaks up and says, I had to talk a top talent out of deciding to leave our company because of the same issue. And so here were all these men around the room who just didn't have that perspective or life experience. And the fourth woman who led benefits for the organization came out with statistics to really drive home our point about the number one issue our associates wanted at the time. There wasn't any other conversation in the room. Lee called for the vote, and we brought in Well Baby Care that year. But in a flash, I had to figure out how I was going to make my case, how it was going to be compelling, and how nobody could, put bullets in my case. If I tried to fight them on the financial side, which I could have talked about, but I wasn't going to win. But on the personal experience side, which is why they wanted all the women that were there sitting in the room. And it worked. And it really became the way I learned how to use my voice.
Wow. So we're going to get into partnerships and social impact, but before we do that, the title of your book, Gracious and Strong, in leadership and leading with grace, if when you lead with grace and you're thinking about as a CEO or an exec in an organization, grace sometimes can make you seem weak, can make you seem, a little bit wobbly, not as strong, but then strength can make you seem arrogant. So where is the balance, and how do you propose to them that they lead with grace and to be strong?
Brilliant question. My definition of leading with grace has three components: cultivating the heart, cultivating the mind, cultivating respect of those that you lead and those that you interact with. There is no reason to demean someone else in any conversation, in any way, for any purpose. If that's your motive, then I don't want to be a part of it as an individual or as a leader of high-performing teams. And so leading with grace is really hard to do, because what does it mean to cultivate the heart? People have to believe that you care about them, and you have to show up. You have to be involved in things that matter to them. Cultivating the mind is creating a vision that has them in the center of that, has them a part of being an influencer, an ability to make a difference. And then cultivating respect is by always treating each other with the ultimate respect, being inclusive in how you connect with individuals that are different from you, and focusing on what's a common goal or objective. And none of those are easy behaviors to demonstrate. In certain authority levels, I could tell people what to do, and they'd pretty much have to do it, right, in the chain of command. It was never my approach, never. And if you want a testimony to that, I have a person with me today. I call her my Chief Administration Officer. She worked for me for years at Walmart leading communications, and she still wants to work with me. Even as she's not at Walmart anymore, I'm not at Walmart anymore, but she reached out and said, I want to be a part of whatever you're doing. And let me tell you, we didn't always have soft, fluffy conversations. It's about being direct and hard, but in a way that said, I care about you. I'm only giving you this feedback because I want you to be better as a result of working with me and partnering with me. And that's leading with grace, gracious and strong.
Wow. Now, partnerships, that's what this is
Yes,
about.
yes.
Getting down to partnerships, why they matter, and also social impact. Wow. Let's just go back to Walmart for a moment, because I know that you have, even since Walmart, you've partnered with a lot of different organizations. But of course, partnerships, how important are partnerships with companies as big as Walmart, for companies that may be in this room, for nonprofits and government agencies? How important is it that we partner with companies like a Walmart?
It's important to partner. It may not always be a company the size of a Walmart. I would say two things. Always shoot for the stars. So don't be afraid to go to those big companies with a compelling vision for who you are and a shared vision about how you could come together and solve a community or societal solution that needs to be solved. You can't come into those relationships and say, oh, I need money. You have to build a relationship with them over time, sometimes a year or two, sometimes even longer than that. Because in building that relationship, what you're doing is you're demonstrating competency, you're demonstrating a common mission, and you're building trust. You're saying, hey, I'm gonna be there for you. How can I help you move your mission forward? Long before you ever have a conversation with them that says, this would be a way that you could help me move my mission forward. I'll use one example, and while I was at Walmart, and this was with Dress for Success. I don't know if you've ever heard of this organization, but it's a really powerful women's development and helping women get back into the workforce with the skills that they need from whatever life's hard circumstances have happened to them and with them. And I started the Women's Officer Caucus at Walmart. So one of the things I realized when I became an officer, I had no idea how many other women officers there were, which is vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president. But sitting in the seat that I had as executive vice president, I knew there were more than any of us thought. So I said, let's come together. We need each other. And let's create a group called the Women's Officer Caucus. And we had 4 reasons for coming together. One was networking, one was development, one was bringing along great talent that was already inside Walmart, but we weren't seeing them, we weren't paying attention. And the 4th was giving back in the community. Well, because we had this strong focus on developing women, the Walmart Foundation went out and began to build a relationship with Dress for Success. And they said, hey, would our women officers, the caucus, want to be development coaches for these delegates from all 26 regions across the country who come together with a project and they present and they get awards and recognition and sometimes money to help sponsor their project? Sure, it was a great partnership because we could do it in our regular work schedule. We didn't have to get up and go to a meeting. We got on the phone and we were professional coaches for these delegates. And I got so much more out of every single one of those coaching relationships than I think the delegates ever got, but they were always very complimentary about the work. And then we got really competitive ourselves, the women across Walmart, because I was working with somebody in Houston and somebody else was working with a delegate in Cleveland, and Cleveland won. She won the national competition. I'm like, oh my gosh, what did you do? How did she win? What was the key? What was the secret sauce? And it just brought us all back together to say, we're giving back in our business acumen in a way that really matters for these women, the impact they can make. The reason I use that story is you could bring an idea like that to almost any organization. Do you have people who are your best and brightest that you want to have developed by leaders inside an organization, really any size? That model is easy to put together, cost a little bit of money to just seed and the relationship building expenses, but that's really it. And yet, we built then such a relationship with Dress for Success that we brought in a chapter into Northwest Arkansas, and we're proud to support it as we continue.
Well, and I think that we miss that sometimes, that relationship building, because it's the relationship that allows you to move into sponsorship, and then that allows you to really get that grant, or because sometimes it's not just about the money, it's about what the person might lead you to. I have a foundation, and I know a couple people around town, so I really wanted to put together a computer center for kids. And so I called up a guy that I knew many, many years ago, and he happened to be over the computer center for a large corporation here in the state. And it took one phone call, and he delivered to me 30 computers for my computer lab. It was because of relationship. It wasn't a grant, it wasn't, but it's that relationship. And yes, it does take time to build. And even, sometimes I know, whether you're out there networking, you may think that it's not paying off, but building those relationships is key, correct?
Absolutely. And networking with a purpose is the way that I like to describe it. I poo-pooed networking as I was kind of coming up through the ranks because I thought it was politically focused, I don't have time for it. I just need to put my head down and do a great job, and somebody will recognize the greatness that I'm delivering. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Nobody delivers the greatness, or they come to expect it and pass you by. And I started saying, okay, that model isn't working for me, so what about trying some networking with a purpose? And that's how I actually began to serve in the community in Northwest Arkansas. Is I got invited by the Walmart Foundation again to be on the Children's Miracle Network Hospital Board of Directors. And that's a national children's hospital network. Arkansas Children's happens to be one of the preeminent children's hospitals in that network. And I just began building relationships. And I will tell you, to this day, post-Walmart, those people that I served with at Children's Miracle Network hospitals have been the first to come in and say, come speak at my company. How can I get you on a board of directors, list of candidates? Children's Miracle Network asks me to come and talk to their development officers. So that was 20 years ago that I started down that path. But these are people that I served with, I was in the trenches with, I became like-minded or controversial even. I mean, it's not always about agreeing with each other. It's about finding a common solution that maybe, because of your conversation and your differences of opinion is better because the two of you collaborate. And so today I'm on the Arkansas Children's Foundation board, and I am no longer on the Children's Miracle Network Hospital board because that seat belonged to Walmart, not to me individually. But I've got so many outcomes from offshoots from that relationship that have been, lifelong, compelling giving back relationships.
So while you're doing it for the company that you're with, it goes with you. The relationships go with you. That's what allows you to get that next position, because you're able to bring relationships and value in what you're bringing forth. Now, let's look at a partnership that you're involved with Walmart and the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. Tell us about that partnership and why it's important to us here in the room.
Yeah, great. Through my board service, I decided that I had some time to consult. And I really have been drawn to children, and Arkansas Children's Hospital, CMNH, all fit that. But I also ran all of talent development for Walmart US, so I was in training and development. So I said, in the space of education, that really matters to me, the quality of education in our state. And I told one of my nonprofits, hey, I'm looking for a consulting opportunity. If one comes by that you think would fit, let me know. Forward Arkansas came by and said, we need boots on the ground in Northwest Arkansas. Forward Arkansas is a small but impactful nonprofit that came together as a result of Arkansas State Board of Education, the Walton Family Foundation, and the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, who all said the state of education in the state of Arkansas must get better. We have a responsibility to our children to improve education. And so we focus on partnerships between parents, educators, civic leaders, and policymakers. And we began our charter with 5 communities that were designated as forward communities, and they had to be willing to work with us on a community engagement model. And those 5 communities are, I won't get them in proper alphabetical order, but I'll start in Northwest Arkansas. It's Pea Ridge, and then Springdale, and then Lee County, then Crossett, and then Independence County, which is Batesville area. And they are all unique and different communities. They all have different issues that they're dealing with. But what are the common ways that we can create success models that change achievement and change quality and change access and equity to quality education, and then replicate those models across the state? It's a remarkable organization. And what's really unique about it is Walton Family Foundation has a different philosophy on education than the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation has. That's the beauty of the relationship, is that they both said, let's put those aside and let's go focus on lifting education for our kids in the state of Arkansas. And then there's the Arkansas State Board of Education right in the middle of that, saying, and let us help, remove barriers, open doors, assist in that strategic vision for the state. It's been a remarkable experience. Thurman Green is one of our associates, and he works a lot in Lee County and Crossett, and he's based here in Little Rock. I work in the Northwest Arkansas area, and it's remarkable what we're doing together.
Well, so how can organizations and state agencies begin to partner with or take advantage of what Forward Arkansas is doing?
A great question. If you have like-minded education goals, improving access, equity, opportunity, and innovation in education, then already right there you have a common mission with us. Come to the Forward Arkansas offices. They are on Ottenheimer Plaza in the River Market area. Did I get that right? Yeah, okay, good. Happy to give you more information on how to contact them. But come learn more and just express an interest in what you bring as a unique value proposition, because I always believe you don't just come and ask for, how can you support me? What is your unique value proposition? Why does it matter to the state of education in Arkansas? Then that's just the baseline for building a relationship.
Yeah. Let's talk about that for a moment before we move into social impact, because a lot of times when we need something, we always lead with, do you have money? What do you have? This is what I need. But you're saying you literally should make sure that you are also delivering to the other person, especially a partner, what they need, because you don't want the relationship to be out of balance.
Correct. Never lead with the ask. The likelihood of you getting a no is so much greater. Always lead with building a relationship and your unique value proposition. Because understand that, even just like we started this conversation, nobody introduced me. We began a conversation, and Deborah got to tell us about, yourself and your career. I had to have that down in a very succinct way to share with you who I am and why I'm qualified to be sitting in this seat working with you all today. You got to have that down just that quick. Sometimes it's called an elevator pitch or an elevator speech. Have it down. And you can version it and message it for your audience, but it's at the core who you are, what you stand for, and not why you're here for money, but wanting to learn, wanting to understand what they do, and building a relationship with them.
Yeah. So in that partnership, let's give them some practical ways to begin to go after partnerships, and not just grant monies or anything like that, but partnerships, because as I said, it comes in more than just money. It could come with resources. It could come with a lot of different things. So how do they begin to build a relationship with a Walmart or with the Rockefeller Foundation or Forward Arkansas or any other organization that they feel that in the long run it would be a win-win situation?
The first is, as I said, network with a purpose. Is there a gathering where someone from that organization might be in attendance and you want to meet them? When you sign up for going to that event, see if you can be seated near them. All these are just questions. And the worst that can happen is they'll say, well, no, we don't seat people that way, but I'll tell you the name of who's coming from Walton Family Foundation. And then your radar is, I need to go meet that person. And so guess what? You're introducing yourself to a whole bunch of people. And along the way, you actually might find somebody who's equally of value to you than the person from the organization that you thought of. So that's networking with a purpose, but really being specific about who you're looking for, that introduction, and then your unique value proposition.
And really briefly, I want you to touch on a point that you make, you talk about on your website and in your book. It is about going from the relationships, are also about mentoring, and moving from mentoring, meaning that you have someone who you look up to and they help to guide you in your career, into a sponsorship. That is somebody who's going to make way for you to sit at a particular place or do a particular thing. So talk a little bit about, because I think that's very important as we talked about leadership and being authentic, them trying to create and how to create sponsorships and people who are in positions to help your organization and you individually to move to the next level.
I would be happy to talk about that, because there's an art to mentoring and asking for a sponsor. Mentorship, the way that I would advise folks is have a reason why you want to be mentored by an individual. Do your homework on what do they demonstrate that's going to bring you, it's going to be valuable for you. So inside Walmart, I'd never run logistics before I had the logistics organization within Sam's Club. So I went to the gentleman who was running the logistics organization for Walmart Inc. and I said, Mike, could I be a mentor of yours? I really need to learn this business. I'm open to any suggestions. I'd love to go visit DCs, whatever works. And his name was Mike Duke. Little did I know he would be the CEO a few years later. But he said yes. And I mean, he had a reason to mentor me, just like I had a reason to ask. He wanted me to be successful in running that division, right? He gave me some of the toughest feedback I've ever gotten in my life. But it was all things I needed to hear. They were all barriers or obstacles. And eventually through that, I was prepared in every conversation. He gave me 30 minutes and no more. If I decided to squander that 30 minutes, then I squandered it. But at the end of 30 minutes, he would wrap his, book or notebook and say, it's been a great conversation. See you next month. And I was in charge of the agenda. I was in charge of doing the things that we committed to be done, and I was in charge of reporting back to him on my learnings. And because I did that, because I came prepared, I followed up, I shared what I learned from it, I didn't just take in the conversation, he began to be a sponsor. He began to say, here's what I see in her that I find refreshing, or it's been a real challenge, kind of beating this into her head, but she's getting it. And he would always be in more rooms having a conversation about me and where I might fit in my career. And my potential, which is really the critical point about growth, is what potential are you demonstrating? And when a leader who's a mentor sees this great potential in you and can be the advocate for you in rooms where you're not even present for that discussion, that all of a sudden becomes a sponsor, because they're putting their name on your success. They're going to give you stretch assignments. When I left the Sam's Club division and made the transition over to the Walmart side of the business, I was getting back into human resources. It had been 8, 9 years. They had not seen me. The new leadership team had never seen me in a human resource capacity, which was shocking to me because I'd been doing that for 30 years, right? But I went back and had an opportunity. Who's knocking on my door? It's Mike Duke saying, I now lead all of Walmart US. We have a serious transformation that we need to lead, and I want you to be on my leadership team to be responsible for change management and associate communications while we go through this transformation. I would have never thought that opportunity would have been given to me. It wasn't even a job that we had inside the organization, but because of Mike's sponsorship, he went to battle and said, let me see if she can do this job. And at that moment in time, I then had 12 more years with the company in several different capacities, but because my sponsor helped me with that transition. That's why you want a sponsor. That's the difference between a sponsor and a mentor. But you can't just walk in and say, will you be my sponsor? I can't tell you how many people have come and said that to me. Will you be my sponsor?
Will you be my sponsor?
Yeah, no, I won't be, because I don't know you well enough, right?
Absolutely.
And even when people come to me and say, will you be my mentor? Why do you want me?
Right.
What does success look like in your mind from this relationship? And I'm not going to set any of the schedules. I'm not going to set any of the agendas. And I'll do the follow-up that I commit to. The rest is yours to manage. Because if you don't have skin in this game, it's not going to matter to you. You are not going to get the maximum benefit out of it.
Absolutely.
And that's the only way I go into mentorships and eventually sponsorships, like with Leanne.
Great, great, great. So I want to move into social impact, but is there any last word or anything you would like to share concerning partnerships and a takeaway that they can take with them to go make some massive change?
Yes, you caused me all to go back and read some chapters in my book, which is great, right? The way the book is written is it's each chapter has stories, but at the end of the chapter, there's practical application techniques to use. And in the chapter called Making an Impact, I give you 5 steps or techniques to use in being a person who makes an impact. And so step 1, and again, if you want this model, you can buy the book or you can email me, and I'll send you the model. But it's be clear about the expected outcome. Begin with data, research, models about your current situation, and then involve others in envisioning what's possible and why it matters. You're not even really, you're not asking for money or anything else. You're working on the vision. What's the outcome? What could we do together? Second is be memorable. Use stories and examples that will cause people to remember that conversation with you. What about you or your style or what you give back is going to be memorable from that conversation. Number 3 is celebrate the small wins. You may want to make a big ask of that organization at some point in time, but guess what? You might get a second appointment with them. That's celebrate a small win. Guess what? They might actually give you access to people inside their organization that they want to work with you to work on a solution that will have impact. Constantly be looking for those hopeful signs, the progress, celebrating the small wins along the way. Communicate like water on stone. Our marketing executive at Walmart used to say this all the time. Water on stone. Same message. Drip, 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 drip. And it will become your, your brand. People will understand what it is that you're talking about. Save money, live better. Clearly you know whose logo and tagline and mission statement that is, right? Okay? Do you hear it a lot? Yeah, you hear it all the time. That's communicating like water on stone. And so be consistent and constant and use every opportunity to reinforce your goal. In that case, it's, we are driving costs out of products at Walmart so that you can have access to high quality goods at the lowest possible prices. Come shop with us. They don't even have to say that. Come shop with us is the point, right? And step number 5 is do not settle. Do not bring your expectations down because of inability to break through or because it just seems too hard. Nothing wonderful ever happens if it's not hard. And so don't settle. Always hold your standards high. Create a plan. Oh, and then my action is try this. Try the 5 steps. Pick an issue that you're wrestling with. It may be, how do I get in the door of XYZ? How do I become a better networker? How do I create a compelling vision? Wherever you are, whatever you're working on, use those 5 steps and just see what it does for you. Did it work? I'll bet you 99% of the time it'll work. And what is amazing about a model like that is all of a sudden transformation begins to happen and you're the catalyst in the center for that. And oh my gosh, the energy that brings back to you, the possibilities that you never even saw in front of you all start to become known. And it becomes an inspiration to be a part of something like that. And it just causes you to keep on going.
Wow, great. Thank you so very much for that. Okay, let's move into social impact. I know that a lot of us around here, we've got these lofty ideas that not only are we going to change our community, our city, our state, but we're going to change the world with what we're doing. This idea is it. We want to really make a difference, right? And then we are, attacked with all of the issues that we have into getting to make that impact. What would you say? Let's move money out of the way for a moment, because a lot of us think that money is the only way we can really make a difference. How can we make the biggest social impact without money?
Be very clear about what it is you want to accomplish. Because so many distractions can come along, and squirrels, that's what I call it. Oh, squirrel, and I'm chasing that squirrel. That squirrel doesn't matter to what it is that I need to be focused on. And I need to just really keep the squirrels out of my life, right? And so be really clear about what you see as the outcome that you want to achieve. Second is eliminate, I'll put in the positive, stay focused. And when things take you off course, the best thing for me is always writing it down, memorializing it. I take copious notes. I do that so that, I actually can recall and remember, and, I'm really in the moment when I take my notes. So I write these things down, and then I go back and I say, is that as compelling? Is it clear? Is it succinct? And what is drawing me away from accomplishing that today? And then the third is really not always having your head down. Lift your head up to pay attention to what's happening around you in society. Who else is working on something similar? Who's an organization nonprofit, profit, who's working in solving the same issue that you are, and how do you come to them in a win-win solution, developing a win-win solution? Because I'm also about there shouldn't always be a win-lose solution in the situation. Those of us who are great at collaborating and creating partnerships look for win-wins. And when you can approach a situation where everybody gets something of significance out of it, it's kind of back to the leadership characteristic of show that you care. That's your way of showing that you care, is when you're willing to negotiate a win-win solution versus a win-lose.
Wow. So now let's talk about the money, because we do need money to make that social impact. How do we, outside of, yes, we've got the grant situations, and we've got, how can we make sure, or what is a key thing that we can do to make sure that we can be funded? What's the best way for us to say, hey, I'm building the relationship, I understand all of that, I'm looking for the partnerships, but right now we need to keep the bills on. We've got to keep the water on, we've got to keep the gas on for a lot of the smaller nonprofits. We've got to do this project. How can we reach out, and what are maybe some creative ways of finding money outside of the grant process?
I will tell you that when you're ready to make the ask, and again, we've already talked about it's not your first, second, or third conversation is the monetary ask. But when you're ready to make the ask, center it on what matters to the person that you're talking to. So even when I think about at Arkansas Children's Hospital, when we ask for donations or donors, it's always about what matters to their heart and soul, and how can that be applied within the system that we have. It is the same method for asking for money as a nonprofit. And I work with several small nonprofits in Northwest Arkansas, the Jones Trust, the Endeavor Foundation's a little bit larger, but these are organizations that are also in that same situation where in order to grow and thrive, they need dollars. Is there a project that just hits right in the heart and soul of what that person that you've been learning about and building a relationship with, hits them right square in their heart? When that can happen, honestly, and you make it, here's what we can build together, it changes the conversation.
And you really need to know just as much about them and what they want than what you're bringing to the table. Sometimes we neglect to know what the values and what the mission and vision is of the people we're asking, for money from.
What's compelling that you just picked up on is, I said build relationships. It's not just for the purpose of building a relationship. It's really getting to understand what really matters to them, what's compelling and inspirational to them. Mm-hmm. Because when you can connect those things, believe it or not, people will say yes so much quicker, because they've got a stake in the game for you to be successful with that project, with that initiative, et cetera.
Okay, so I know that we all come from different organizations or state agencies in the room, and what I want, because we have this great, unique opportunity to have such a talent with us today, she's been there, she's done that, she's managed large organizations, she's just been through whatever you're going through. So I'm sure if you've got an issue in the room, she can kind of guide you through. So you don't even have to have her as a mentor right now, nor a sponsor. She can answer your questions. So come to the table and let's be specific. Let's try to leave here today with something that we can make change with when we go home. Question.
So first of all, I think I speak for the room. Wow. Just wow.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow to Deborah, too. She's
no,
brilliant
absolutely.
at pulling it out.
Absolutely. And my name's Steve Bernack. I'm with City Connections here in Little Rock. And I don't know who all Celia may have said hello to or not, but she practices what she just preached. She walked out of the room earlier. She said, "Hi, I'm Celia, I'm going to be your speaker today. And just introduced herself to me as if, here's some dude. And I'm like, hi, here's some chick, and here we go. But she practices what she preaches. So you talked about the things that are passionate to you. And you talked a little bit about networking. Can you describe, because I'm a big networker, I love to network because I want to know what everybody else is doing so that when my friend Joe Chaco says, hey, Steve, I've got this idea, I go, Joe, that's awesome, I know who to connect you with. Right. Can you talk about the importance of that networking so that you could end up connecting maybe somebody at Winthrop Rockefeller or in the Walmart organization that you know is passionate about XYZ to make those connections and how that works for you?
Yes. Now I'm an extrovert, and I hope that was pretty clear, right? That would be my style. But so I don't see anybody as a stranger. I see everyone as someone that I can get to know, and that, together we're just better because we're all, in our mission and in our lives together. So one of the things I learned at Walmart, when you walk through the stores, what's your impression of an executive who might be coming into whatever organization you have, and they're coming in for a daily visit? Yeah, they're probably not going to say anything to you, right? They're going to be kind of on a mission. They're not going to engage with you. And I said, not how I'm going to make, my brand. I'm going to introduce myself to every associate. I'm going to ask them a question or two, and then I'm going to recognize them. And you can do that in 30 seconds. It doesn't take a long time. And sometimes instead of recognizing it, oh, that's what you're working on? I happen to know of this other foundation over here, or I know about another nonprofit that might not be exactly the same thing, but let me make you a connection. Deborah and I are in the ladies' room, okay? And I said to her, do you know Marie Osmond? She lives in Las Vegas. She says, no, I don't know Marie Osmond. I said, you should absolutely know Marie Osmond. Now, the reason I know Marie Osmond is because she started Children's Miracle Network Hospitals. And it was their family foundation, the Osmond Family Foundation, that then became Children's Miracle Network Hospitals. And I said, she's such an awesome woman. I want you to meet her. So when I get back, I'm sending Deborah a note, and I'm sending Marie a note and saying, you two need to meet because you're in the same community. And she didn't ask me for it.
She immediately became a sponsor, see?
Well, at least a connector.
A connector, yes.
A connector. In 30 seconds. Yes. That's what you can do with and for other people. I just believe that's how you give back.
Cool. Any other questions? One of the while we wait on some of the others, as I glean through your book and just your bio and your website, you guys should go to her website, CeliaSwanson.com, or is it .org? It's .com. She's got such a vast array of just resources there. You can download things, you can just get anything you want, and then of course go to Amazon and read, just a preview of her book, like
go to Walmart.com.
Oh, okay.
I get that all the time because Amazon owns the online book business, but I'm like,
Okay, but
wherever you go,
you don't even have to go there. Go over to the table and get a book, and then you can go through it. But one of the things that when you first left Sam's and you went to Walmart, one of the things that you had to do was you had to get rid of some people. You had to make a transition to really clean house so that you could be very focused about what the goals were with the position you were coming into. And I know a lot of us have that. We probably work with people who we wish we didn't. And we know they're not doing a great job, and we don't know how to, to clean house. How did you effectively go in and tell us about that process and how many people you literally had to let go of, and what was the thought process in the overall mission of what you were doing?
Yeah, it was probably one of the hardest challenges I've had to face. Dana's giving us okay, so I'll be quick.
No, really?
I'll be quick. And I had to understand what was the value proposition of the department that I was leading. Why should the organization decide they were critical to the business, because they were about to outsource all of talent development. And they kind of gave it to me and said, one last try. And so I had to go in and say, why does the company need us? Second, then what are the core skills we need to have, and what are the skills we don't need to have? And then, quite honestly, it was a relationship. We did performance ranking, but it was all on performance and potential. Everybody had an equal slate for evaluation. And then, honestly, we didn't continue doing some of the things that we did before. And yet I sat down with every single individual when they got told that they were no longer going to be on the team. And I didn't leave it to somebody else to have that conversation. I explained why. So many leaders never do that last step. That's a hard conversation to have. Well, yeah, it's a hard conversation to have, but how much better do you think somebody felt? And I know this because I've gotten testimonials back. How much better did they feel when they said, you were the one who said that to me. You were open and honest about it. I did not demean them. Remember, respect for the individual always. I made the case, and then I said, let me help you in your transition. And I meant that, and I delivered on that. And they just really couldn't argue because there was empathy and care, but we were able to cut 20% of the staff and really hone what we were doing inside the organization.
That's key to being leaders, as I know most of us in the room are. Dana, can I take this last one and then that's it? Okay, thank you so very much. Quick question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Austin. I work with the city. During the interview, you mentioned that you didn't really like networking because you felt like it was just kind of like politicking and just like going around and like just basically like shaking hands.
That's
and,
right.
Like, maybe you won't get anything from it. But I know for a lot of people, you said that you were naturally extroverted, but for some people, they have this passion to, really go out into the community and they want to make a change and they have really good ideas, but socially there's something in them to where they can't really network, or they just really kind of like don't have the ability because they're introverted, or they kind of like have an anxiety about networking with people. So do you have any advice for people like that?
My first piece of advice would be put yourself in a situation that makes you uncomfortable. Just go the first time. Don't even go to the step of, hi, how are you? My name's Celia. What do you do? What do I do? How can I help you? That's, the outcome that you want to achieve is that you're able to interact that way. If that's the outcome, that's my outcome. Yours might be different. But begin to get comfortable in audiences of people that you don't know at all. And then start working on, because somebody's going to ask, oh, who are you? Introduce yourself to me. I mean, it's not like you're going to walk in the room and walk out and no one will interact with you. The likelihood of that happening is slim to none. So have a few words, kind of, even if it's on a note card. This is what I want to say to somebody when they ask me. And then be comfortable in that. Just begin to build that competency inside yourself. And then be selective. That's the other thing. Don't just go to every event that's out there. I said networking with a purpose because that's really critical. Go to the ones where you think you're going to get the best return. I happen to think this is a great conference for that purpose, and I'm thrilled to see as many people here because I don't know of another place that's going to invest in you, and certainly not for whatever the nominal fee was to be a part of this conference. This is a great return on investment, but find these gems and go there. Don't waste all your, extrovert energy that you have to muster up on a place that just isn't going to have a return for you.
Thank you so very much.
Wait, Deborah, before
Yes.
you even go there, just on that particular point, for those of you who might be in the room, another place that you can get the training that you need to be able to speak or learn how to talk to people is Toastmasters. It's a very great place to go to learn the things that you need to hone what you want to say, how to think on your feet, and just all those different things. And it's not very expensive to join Toastmasters either. So that's just a quick plug. I don't work for Toastmasters, I'm just saying.
Thank you. Celia Swanson, thank you so very much. The first female executive vice president of Walmart and author of Gracious and Strong. Thank you so very much for all you do.
My pleasure. You are awesome,
Thank you.
and thank you for having me today.